Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us this evening. This is John McDougall. I am the event coordinator here at Murder by the Book in Houston. And before we get into tonight's event, I just wanted to make some quick store announcement stuff, let everybody know what is going on with us while everybody comes and finds us from the various corners of the internet. So first up, it popped up in my Facebook memories today that exactly 1 year ago, we announced on Facebook that we were going to be reopening in store, no appointment needed, for people to come in and start shopping again. So Halloween was the first day that we were actually like normal open again for customers a year ago, which seems insane that that was a year ago. So we are open. If you haven't come to visit us in a while, we hope that you will come visit us. We are still asking that you wear masks in the store. As you know, kids under 12 can't get vaccinated just yet. And we also do have a lot of customers that are in town getting treatment at MD Anderson. And we just want to make sure that everybody feels comfortable when they come in. We do have some extra masks. So if you pull up and you realize you don't have one, just pop your head in the door and ask us. We'll bring one over to you. Also, we know that there are still some people who are just doing curbside pickup. So if you want to do that, you can always just give us a call when you're pulling into the parking lot. We're more than happy to run books out to you. We're happy to do that whether there's a pandemic or not. You know, if you're running late and you just need to pick up some stuff, just give us a call. We're happy to run out in the parking lot, throw it in your trunk, and send you on your way. We are going to finish up the rest of 2021 with virtual author events. There are like maybe one or two more things that I'm waiting to get confirmation from moderators before we get them added to the website. But for all intents and purposes, the 2021 calendar is set. We will be doing a Murder by the Book Recommends in store on Small Business Saturday. So we'll have some more information about that coming up really soon. We're hoping in 2022 that we will get back to some in-store stuff. We're working on some things now, and hopefully we'll be able to make some official announcements about those soon. So definitely keep an eye on the store's website, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and of course the Murder by the Book newsletter as well. The last thing I wanted to mention before we get started, as we have said during our virtual events, the best way to support our authors that we're chatting with and the store is of course always to buy the book that we're talking about tonight, which is Murder at Mallowan Hall. But we realize that sometimes people they just want to hear the author talk about the book. Maybe they picked it up elsewhere. If that is the case and you still want to be able to support Murder by the Book, we have partnered with the Evelyn Swerzinski Foundation. Evie was the daughter of Dwayne Swerzinski, who is a good friend of the store, and unfortunately she passed away a couple of years ago to cancer. And one of the ways that the family has kept her legacy going is they do a holiday book drive every year to collect books for the Children's Hospital in LA. This year their goal is to get 2,500 books donated. We have already surpassed, it just started Monday, we have already surpassed the donations that we received last year. We're so excited that they're going to potentially hit this, at least this goal of 2,500 this year. So I will drop a link in the comments. So if you feel interested in donating to that, there's a link there. I also am dropping a link for tonight's event. So if you were interested in Colleen's book, there'll be more information there. And as we're chatting, if you have questions for her, either about this new book, previous books, writing process, any of that stuff, please post those in the comments and I will pepper those in as we're chatting. But tonight I'm going to get us started and bring Colleen out. How are you tonight, Colleen?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for doing this with us this evening.
Really happy to do it.
Congratulations on the release of the new book.
Thank you. It's been really fun.
Yeah. So for those of you who may not be familiar, Colleen Cambridge is a pseudonym for New York Times and USA Today bestselling author whose books have been translated into more than 8 languages. She lives in the Midwest and is hard at work on her next novel. You can visit her at ColleenCambridge.com. As I mentioned, Murder at Mallowan Hall is the newest book and it just came out on Tuesday. So to get us started, can you tell everybody a little bit about kind of the elevator pitch for the new book?
What if a dead body was found in Agatha Christie's own home? That's basically what happens in this book. And it is Phillida Bright, the housekeeper at Mallowan Hall, which is where Agatha Christie lives with her second husband, Max Mallowan. So Phillida Bright walks into the library one morning during a house party, a weekend house party. Agatha and Max have a bunch of people over and she finds a man on the floor with a fountain pen protruding from his neck and blood everywhere. And so that's the thing. And so Phillida Bright, the housekeeper, is the protagonist. She's the main character. And as Agatha Christie's housekeeper, she's obviously well accustomed to the idea of murder mysteries and clues and investigations, at least on a fictional basis. But she decides to take it upon herself to see if she can figure out who did this.
Perfect. That's a perfect elevator pitch. Usually if it's this early in the book tour, not everybody has that nailed down, but you did that so well.
Thank you.
So
I talk forever, so
yeah.
I'm glad that it was a short enough elevator pitch.
Yeah. So one of the things that's really interesting about the book is that you have created a fictional staff for Agatha, and you've also created a fictional house for her. Can you talk a little bit about the decision to do that?
Yes, I can. So when I first started putting together this, developing this series, I knew it was going to be Agatha Christie's housekeeper solving mysteries. And in order for it to become, in my mind, a series that had legs, I felt like I needed a large, generous setting, meaning a house with lots of nooks and crannies and rooms that would hold not only potential suspects, staff members, but also lots of dead bodies. Because if you're going to write a series, you've got to, be able to think ahead. So I didn't. And Agatha Christie owned many houses. I think she had 3 different houses. She did have a country home, Greenway, but it's not nearly as large as this Mallowan Hall, which of course, as you mentioned, is fictitious. I was thinking Downton Abbey size when I developed this, because I wanted to have, like I said, the number of staff, and I wanted the space, and I thought it would be more interesting. So that was a decision that I made specifically because I didn't want to be restricted by the size. And I also wanted a large enough staff, not only for supporting characters, but a larger staff means that the housekeeper doesn't really have to do as much actual work. So she actually has time to, go around and search for clues and investigate and interrogate people. So those were all very specific decisions that I made for those reasons.
So did you have kind of a real house in mind when you were plotting and kind of figuring out where things were going to be in the house?
I don't know where the house was that I had seen that's in my head when I'm picturing the layout of the house. It's probably, to be honest, it's probably one of those many, many large English estates that are in all of the BBC TV shows like Midsummer Murders or Poirot. I'm sure it's one of them. That's where it all came from. So, none in particular, but, a big one. Yeah.
So did you draw yourself out a floor plan so that way you kind of knew where everything was?
I should have, and I had to go back and look, but no, I haven't done that yet. And that is the kind of thing I normally would do. So I probably will at some point. The grounds, I kind of drew like a basic, really basic map, but I didn't do the house yet. Maybe I should get on
that. So as you mentioned, the Agatha's lady's maid, she's a really interesting character because you find out early on that she did not come up through service like most housemaids would. Can you talk a little bit about that too?
Yes. So when like I said, when I was developing the character, I thought about what kind of a person would be a good amateur detective before I started really thinking about all the details, like what kind of characteristics does she need? And also, why would someone who has these characteristics be working as a housekeeper? Yeah. So she is the fictional friend of Agatha. And as you may or may not know, Agatha Christie worked in the dispensary at the hospital during World War I, which is how she learned all about the poisons that she uses or used in all of her books or many of her books. And so I decided that Agatha and Phillida knew each other because they were single, they were about the same age, they were both working at the hospital together. And so they developed a friendship way back then in the late teens. And so for some reason, and I have answers in my head as to why, but they haven't been divulged in the book yet. For some reason, their friendship developed and was maintained over the years. And so when Phillida was looking for something different to do, looking for something to get her out of London, hint, hint, something like that, she called on her old friend Agatha. Now, in my mind also, we many of us know that Agatha disappeared for 11 days, famously, in real life. And there's a lot of questions about what happened. And really nobody actually knows what happened except for her. I think Phillida probably knows what happened. And I think that there's some sort of connection between the two women. So that's how Phillida ends up at Mallowan Hall as a housekeeper. And, since she isn't a maid or wasn't a maid, the role of housekeeper, especially in an estate that large, is a very demanding role in the sense you have to be organized, you have to be trustworthy, and you have to be able to manage people well and supervise them well. So she's got a lot of skills. And the other thing about Phillida is she is confident in her skills. She doesn't consider herself this downtrodden servant. She does her job and she does it well, and she knows she's good at it. She's a very, confident woman for a number of reasons that we don't all know yet.
And I liked the choice to have them have been friends previously too, because it lends itself well to, like, those nice moments like early in the book, when this murder has happened, when she walks into the room and Agatha's like, oh, let's sit down and talk about this for a minute, and they can actually connect that way too, more than just kind of a servant would potentially, like with their boss.
Yeah, I really thought that was important, because if they were going to have that relationship, I wanted them to have a friendship, even though it's not noticeable to anybody outside of them and probably Max, Mr. Mallowan. That was the only way I could justify it in my mind.
Yeah. So we were talking before we went live that I'm also a fan of the Holmes and Stoker series that you've done for young readers. And in those, you also played with that kind of the lines of like the fictional world and the real world kind of blending together. Do you think that helped you be able to kind of create kind of the fictitious, like Agatha Christie house and Agatha as a character?
Oh, I love it. And I think so. And I love being able to take history and my own fiction and like kind of blend them together in both cases. And also in my Lincoln's White House Mystery series, which is set during the Lincoln presidency, there's a lot of research that forms the basis for that world. And then I can start to build in the mystery. So I absolutely love being able to take those elements, the real information, and then kind of blossom it into something fictional. Usually all of these books start with the idea of the dead body and where the dead body ends up, if where it shows up in the book. But yeah, I do think it was good preparation for me. There was a little less research in the Stoker and Holmes series, only because it's in an alternate world, but I did do a lot of research about what Victorian London was like, even though I put an overlay over that made it a unique world. But for the Murder at Mallowan Hall book, most of the research that I did was about Agatha Christie's life during the late 20s and 30s, B, her works. So I had the joy of being able to reread many of the books that I had read previously and call it research, call it work. I'm curled up in bed reading a book and I'm telling my husband, yeah, I really am working. This is really work. And then I did a lot of research on what it was like living in a large household and being on staff, being downstairs on a large estate during that time period. So that's where most of my research came in, and what they wore and the kind of cars they had and that kind of thing. So
what kind of sources did you use when you were looking into kind of what the day-to-day life of a servant would be?
I found 2 or 3 memoirs that were written by either a cook or a maid or a housekeeper during that time period. And that really helped a lot, getting into, what it was like for them on a day-to-day basis, the kinds of things that they talked about, the way they talked about their bosses. Like, they used the term boss. Like, for me, that sounds pretty modern day, but they would use that term. That was their term that they used in the memoir. So I felt confident using that term, even though I would have thought it was an anachronism if I hadn't read it in these memoirs. Some of the interesting things that they had to do for their employers, or the way their employers treated them, or just what it was like getting up every day and having to, like, if you start off, if you're a young woman, you start off as a scullery maid in most cases, and you're the first one up in the morning, 5:30. Nobody else is up. You got to make the fire. You got to put the water on for coffee and tea. You've got to go out and scrub the steps, whitewash the steps, and all of that before anybody else even gets up. So I got a lot of information from that. And then I also did, there's a couple books that I used that were just nonfiction, more academic about that sort of the life, the servant life. But I thought the memoirs were the most important and the most interesting.
Awesome. So we've seen, it's funny, Sarah Weinman, who's a book critic, was talking about this the other day online, about how we've seen like a resurgence in things like cozy mysteries. And since the pandemic has started, we've sold through our Agatha Christie section in the store multiple times over. Dean, our former store manager, said kind of also similarly, right after 9/11, pretty much all of the big thrillers that were supposed to come out that year tanked because people were going back to kind of these classics. What do you think it is about Agatha Christie that just keeps bringing people back to her again and again?
There is a reason she's the best-selling author of all time. I mean, her books were written, as you know, in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and on. And I'm rereading them now, as I mentioned, and they hold up so well. Like, they don't feel dated. She's a very witty writer. I just love her sly, dry wit in some of these. And of course, her solutions, they're just classically unique. They're classically brilliant. I mean, there's probably 10 of her novels that are just the solutions are just so brilliant. So I think that's what brings people back. I mean, I think it does help that we have all of these beautiful adaptations, like the Agatha Christie Poirot series with David Suchet, who I think he's the best Poirot ever. I will fight you over that. He is like the best Poirot. So those I think help. But a cozy mystery is called a cozy mystery for a reason, and it's because it's it's still a problem to be solved. There's death, but it's going to be solved. It's going to be happy at the end, and it's not too dark and gory and gritty. And I think sometimes we need stuff like that, like after 9/11 and during the pandemic and during difficult times. So
it's been funny. Like we'll think like, oh, we just got these all in, we're fine, and then somebody will come in and they'll went like, and then there were none, and we'll go back to the stuff. I'm like, oh my gosh, how do we go through all of these so quick? And I came to reading her kind of late, almost kind of after I had started at the bookstore. I had read like one or two before, but it's so interesting going back and reading her, and even something like, and then there were none, and being able to see just kind of where like she's inspired so many people. We actually had a customer come in at one point. It was like, oh, I don't like Agatha Christie because they're too formulaic. And like once we had all picked our jaws up off the floor, we were like, she wrote the formula? Like, what?
Right. Oh, well, hopefully that person got to read some of the ones that didn't feel so formulaic. I could just see like, so, she wrote all these notebooks, you probably know that, where she would just jot down her ideas, and they're not organized in any way, shape, or form. Yeah. And she would just grab notebooks from anywhere, notepads in the house. That actually plays a role a little bit in Mallowan Hall, but her notebooks are not organized. So she might have notes on a future book that shows up in 3 or 4 different notebooks out of order. They're not organized. So she was always thinking ahead. And I'm thinking in my head that she's probably thinking to herself, how do I do a book where everybody's, the murderer? How do I do a book where nobody's the murderer? Just some of these, like, I'm wondering if that's where some of these kernels came from, and she figured out how to do it, after the fact.
Yeah.
So anyway, she holds up so well. Yeah. And a lot of people probably haven't read The Mysterious Mr. Quinn or Parker Pine Detective, but I love those shorts because they're clever and they're interesting, and they're shorts. You can, buzz through them, like if you're, waiting at the doctor's office, or you're, on the subway. Is anybody on the subway right now? I don't even know because of COVID, but so those are ones that aren't even the obvious ones, but I think that those short stories are just so, they're difficult to write. And I think she does a great job with them.
Yeah. So do you have a favorite of the novels?
It's hard for me to pick a favorite, but I really do love The Mysterious Affair at Styles. I really enjoyed Death on the Nile. I just reread that one, and God, it's so good. It's just so good. And I remember reading And Then There Were None. I haven't reread it recently, but the first time I read it, just being blown away by how clever it was. So those are all favorites of mine. Yeah. It's hard to pick one though.
Yeah, it is. And it's been so fun to see kind of contemporary writers kind of putting their twist on them, like Ruth Ware's been doing it with some of her, and like infusing the Gothic elements to it. It's also really interesting that we've seen a resurgence in not just people wanting to read Agatha Christie's novels, but actually novels like featuring her, or her houses. Like Laurie Bader Day just had Death at Greenway come out. Marie Benedict did an Agatha Christie book earlier this year that I'm completely blanking on the title for. So why do you think people are so interested in her as a person as well?
That's a really good question. It could just be that the timing, it's 100 years since her first book came out, roughly. Maybe it's the cyclical thing. It could also be that whole cozy element of it. I mean, this idea was presented to me. I can't take credit for the idea of coming up with the Agatha Christie's housekeeper solving mysteries. So the idea was suggested to me by my editor. The editorial team at Kensington actually came up with the idea. And this was, 2 years ago? Wow. I think it was about 2 years ago. So something was perking about 2 years ago. Clearly, if we had all 3 of these Christie books coming out in 2021, think about that. There was something in the air. And I do find that happens with creativity and projects a lot. I mean, we've seen it happen with movies and so on over the years, where you get I don't know, there's something in the air. I don't know what it is.
And I thought it was also really smart, as we're mentioning, Agatha she's present in the book, but she's not the one that's solving the main crime. And she's kind of more of a periphery character with her and Max. So were you tempted to put her in the book more, or have her have more of a hand in the crime solving?
Actually, I was afraid to do too much with her in the book, in the sense that I don't like to mess too much with a real character like solving mysteries. In my Lincoln's White House series, I had the same kind of issue. Lincoln was a periphery character. He was like a mentor to my detective, but
Mhm.
I prefer to let them be their historical selves and let
Yeah.
me play with my fictional detective in the fictional
Mhm.
setting and so on. My biggest struggle, though, honestly, was when I started thinking about this and how the story would develop. I thought to myself right away, well, what's the reason that Agatha is not going to want to try and solve this mystery? Because it would seem like the obvious thing. And in fact,
Mhm.
many of the detective writers at that time, they were in a group called the Detection Club. I'm not
Mhm.
don't know if you're familiar with it, but Dorothy L. Sayers was in it, G.K. Chesterton, a bunch of them, Agatha Christie, and they actually did kind of a lot of times talk about true crimes and trying to solve mysteries or murders that the authorities weren't able to solve. So I struggled with that a little bit before I came to what was my answer, which would be my answer as a mystery writer. I'm not going to go out and try and solve a murder just because I write mysteries. Because when
Yeah.
I write my mysteries, I can put my clues wherever I want
Mhm.
them. I can develop them. I can find the clues if I need, to have
Yeah.
my detective find the clues. And I just had Agatha say, "Look, that's not my bailiwick. That's not my thing. I write them, I design them, I don't solve them." And
Mhm.
so that was kind of the conversation. So I had to work through that in my head, and trying to keep Agatha as the historical figure that she is, but also a friend to Phillida, is a nice balancing act. And
Mhm.
I'm hoping that I've managed to maintain that in a proper way.
I
If that
think
makes
you,
sense.
yeah, I think you did. So we just had a question from Jay, who was kind of mentioning, are there any romantic or funny scenes between Agatha and Max, apart from the mystery, and how far into their marriage does the book cover? And like we were saying, they're there in the book, but they're definitely not the focus. They're just kind of there moving around as Phillida is solving the mystery.
We see more, we see Phillida and Agatha one-on-one together. We don't see a lot of Agatha and Max. We never see anything from Agatha's point of view, but
Mhm.
we do see a little bit of their marriage, just a little bit, where they you see him supporting her and you see him supporting Phillida as the amateur detective and helping her kind of get the authorities to listen to her, because as one of the gentry in the area, it wasn't really technically gentry, but a homeowner in the area, he had a little bit more influence. We do see a smidge more of Max and Agatha together in the second book, which I just finished and turned into my editor. So yes, there will be a second one. And so a little bit more, but again, since she's not the main character and it's never in her point of view, Agatha's point of view, it's only from the periphery. But
Yeah.
I think that we get the sense that there's a lot of respect between the two, Max and Agatha,
Yeah.
and that they really, they were very much in love at this point. This was, and I think they always were, but it was early in their marriage, maybe a year after they got married, that I've set this sort of series.
Yeah, I thought that was a smart way to do it, kind of along the lines of like with Sophie Hannah with the new Poirot books, where kind of Poirot was like a consulting detective and not like the main detective. It's a good way to kind of get people into the world, but without people like kind of nitpicking the specifics,
Exactly. Yes,
which, as we
exactly.
know, readers will nitpick the specifics, especially in historical mysteries.
Well, and that's the thing. I've done research on Agatha's life
Mhm.
focused on the 20s and 30s. I didn't go too far ahead and I didn't or too far back, and I didn't go too far forward. I didn't go at all forward because I didn't want to get mixed up with what we knew at that time about her.
So, as you were sitting down to start the first book, did you have a kind of series arc in mind? Did you know it was going to be a series?
We knew right out the door that my publisher wanted at least two books, and they were talking about a series. So in my mind, I knew that I was going to have to think about future stories. And even though I said when I developed the series, I wanted the house to be big, so there were lots of places to put dead bodies and a large estate. Also, realistically, there's not going to be a dead body in Agatha Christie's house in every book because that's just
Yeah.
ridiculous.
Mhm.
I mean, like in Murder She Wrote and in Midsummer Murders, you've got a
Yeah.
million dead bodies in the same area. But realistic. I'm trying to balance the cozy aspect of the expectations of the reader, but also the realistic side. So
Mhm.
I knew. So I was already thinking, okay, how is this going to work? So for the second book, the murder takes place, not at Agatha Christie's estate, and in the third book, which I'm thinking about, I don't know if the dead body will actually show up at the house, but it will be back in that vicinity. And then I also think that there will be books where they might end up being in London, or somewhere else, because Agatha traveled a lot. She traveled a lot when she was young. She traveled a lot when she was married to Archie Christie. She traveled a lot with Max. So that's why so many of her books are set in so many exotic places. And she speaks with such credibility about, you know, different countries and so on. So I can see them moving around. But at the same time, Phillida is her housekeeper. So she's not like a companion. So there always has to be a legitimate reason for her to be involved in something that takes place not specifically at the estate. So that's going to be the challenge of developing the series.
One of our favorite local writers, Sarah Rosette, does a really great.
I love Sarah's books. Oh my God, I love her books. I loved Olive and Jasper. They're one of my favorites.
Yeah, so she lives in town, so it's always great to see her. But one of the things that she said when she had started the High Society series was that she went back and she read a lot of the Agatha Christie and Dorothy Sayers and things like that, so just so she could get a feel for like the language of the time period. Were you conscious of kind of the way they spoke and the language that they used as you were writing?
Absolutely. I did the same thing. I went back and was reading the Agatha books, not just for, you know, the research on that, but to get the way they talked and their phraseology and the things that they did. And Dorothy L. Sayers as well. I read an Anthony Berkeley book. I read G.K. Chesterton, a lot of those writers that were writing at that time. So absolutely. And I find myself jotting down phrases that they use just so I remember them. And the way they put the way they strung their words together is so slightly different than the way we speak and way we spoke in the 30s. And I will admit, watching a lot of the adaptations on TV helps too. You just hear the voice, you hear the British voice in your head. Yeah.
So as we mentioned in your bio that Colleen Cambridge is a pseudonym, you also write as Colleen Gleason. So what was the decision behind the name change?
Well, the Christie or the Mallowan Hall series, the Phillida Bright series, is pretty much a departure from, say, the Stoker and Holmes series, and even the Lincoln books. The Lincoln books are super dense with history. Not that they're, you know, I don't think that they're slow paced, but there's a lot more specific historical elements in them, and they're, how do I say this? They're not cozies, okay, and they're not
light.
Yeah, I mean, they're right. It's the Civil War. It's not going to be light. So I think there was a marketing decision that was, you know, let's just launch this with a new name. And I picked Cambridge because it sounded British. And I decided to keep Colleen because I don't answer to anything else. So I'd be very confused. So there was a marketing decision because there was a lot of buzz around the book from the beginning. And they thought, let's launch this free and clear with just a whole persona. And I think that was part of the decision. On the part of Kensington. And I'm fine with it because it happens all the time.
Yeah. I thought Cambridge was a good choice because I also thought when we were initially setting up the event, I had initially thought that potentially that you were British and was like, are we going to have to do this in the middle of the day, in the evening, before I knew that it was Colleen Gleason. So you definitely nailed that. It sounds British on that.
Well, there's also the benefit of Cambridge is not that far from Christie on the shelf.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I mean, you know, I was thinking about Cheltenham, no, but I ended up with Cambridge. Yeah. So, although interestingly, I've done a couple events with people who are from England. I could tell by their accent, and they say Mallowan, not Mallowan. So I don't know what is actually correct. I've been saying Mallowan since the beginning, but interestingly enough, two British people, two of them that I've spoken to in the last week or two, said Mallowan. So I don't know. I don't know if I'm saying it wrong or if it's just a personal preference.
Yeah. So throughout your career, you've bounced around in several genres. So when you are starting a book, do you know what genre it's going to be, or is that something that you discovered throughout the writing process?
I do know what genre it's going to be. And actually, all my life, I've loved mysteries, historical mysteries in particular. I became a huge fan of probably maybe 10, maybe 15 years ago when C.S. Harris first started her Sebastian.
I love those books so much too. Yeah.
Yes, I got so hooked on those, and I thought, wow, I had never read a historical mystery, even though there was Death in the one by Ariana. Oh, I can't think of the name. It was the medieval one.
Mistress in the Art of Death.
That one. At the same time, I think they all kind of came out at the same time, but I got really, really hooked on the C.S. Harris, Sebastian St. Cyr books, and I thought this is a genre I love because it's got the history, it's got the mystery, and it's got a romantic thread through it. And all of those things push my buttons. And that's what I love. So I've been so focused on historical mystery for the last, I don't know, 5-6 years. I don't see me going strongly back to anything else, because that's really, I love the genre. I love to read it. I love to write it.
The C.S. Harris books are so good. I read the first one not long after I started the store, and then would have to like I would read like 2 or 3, and then I would have to stop myself because I didn't want to run out, because they're so like juicy and binge worthy and soap opera once you get into the series.
I know, like very soap opera, but they're dense too. They're so dense. I really like Victoria Thompson's Gaslight series too. A little, not as dense, but I really enjoy the way she portrays all these little boroughs in New York, all those areas in New York. Very, very enjoy those too. Yeah.
One of the fun, it's always weird saying that, fun things about the pandemic is being able to do these virtual events. We've been able to kind of pair up people. So we'd actually had never had Victoria Thompson at the store. C.S. Harrison, she lives in New Orleans. She comes fairly regularly, but we were actually able to do a virtual event with the two of them together, and I got to chat with them. It was so much fun, because we would never have been able to do that in store.
Yeah, that is one benefit of the pandemic, if you want to look at it that way. So do you think, I'm going to ask you a question real quick. Once once the pandemic kind of calms down, if it ever does, do you think you'll continue to do some virtual so you can do things like that?
Yeah, we just had a big conversation. McKenna, the store owner, and I, she and I are the ones that have been doing most of the virtual events. So usually we've been doing, I think for the rest of the year, we have something almost every weeknight. So it's been mostly us doing them. So we've been kind of trying to figure out kind of what the plan is going forward. And we're definitely going to, once we can actually start doing some in-store stuff, we're definitely going to scale back on some of the virtual stuff, just because we just can't keep going at the pace we have. We've done, I think when I counted it up, we did 130 events last year. And by time we finish up 2021, we'll have done over 200 of them.
Oh my gosh.
They're fun. And it's a lot. So, but there are nights when you come home from work and you're just like, I just want to be home. I don't want to be on the internet. So,
right. I want a cocktail. I want to curl up with my book. Yeah.
Yeah, so we still want to do virtual stuff. Not all publishers are sending people out on the road yet. Some of them have told us, hey, no, we're not doing this. Some of us have started to set up stuff. So we still want to be able to do it, especially for things like books that we're really excited about, where maybe the author just isn't able to travel. Maybe they don't have the budget to travel. Maybe they live overseas and they can't come to the States. So we definitely still want to be able to do some virtual stuff like that, especially if it's something that we're super excited about. And at some point, we're going to figure out a way that we can actually live stream some of the stuff that we do in the store as well. I know it's slightly tricky. I know Poison Pen live streams a lot of theirs, and they had before for their in-store stuff, and we hadn't, because we'd had authors come in historically and sometimes say, if they've had like a movie deal that they haven't quite signed, like they couldn't talk about some of that stuff that was going to be broadcast. So that kind of would take away some of that really cool kind of like insider gossip stuff. So we're trying to figure out a way that we could potentially still do some in-store stuff and stream it live for people, because, about a third of what we had done historically sales-wise was signed copies from events. So there are customers who have shopped with us for years who have never seen an event in the store, never seen what we've got to do. So it's been nice to be able to connect with them through the virtual events, and we still want to keep doing that. And I know it's an accessibility thing. Not everybody has a bookstore close to them. So we will still keep doing stuff virtually. We just don't quite know what that's going to look like.
It's not 200 a year.
Yeah, not 200 a year.
That's a lot. Yeah. Well, thank you for having me. I've known of your store for years. I've never actually been to Houston. I've been to Dallas a bunch of times, just haven't gotten to Houston, but have known of your store for years. So I'm grateful to be here and really appreciate the opportunity.
We're excited. And it's also crazy when you think about, a lot of the events have been like authors in conversation with other authors too. So if you think about like those 200 events, if even like half of those were with multiple authors, we've talked to hundreds of authors, which is really fun. And like I said, we get to do these kind of cool pairings that we wouldn't necessarily get to do in the store. So we definitely don't want that to go away once we're doing in-store stuff too.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. Although we are really excited about, like you said, you got to do an actual in-store event. We're so excited about that time where we can actually like have an in-store, because the last couple that we did were March of 2020. Like the Houston hadn't issued its stay-at-home order yet. The rodeo had been canceled kind of as it was happening. Like nobody knew what was going on. Publicists were like, "Are you still guys doing events? Are you not doing events?" And like we are, and we were like Cloroxing the chairs between every event, and like people could get their book signed, but they couldn't go behind the table to do photos. And they were like, it's been so long since we've done like a normal author event. I don't even know what that looks like anymore.
I don't even know, right? Exactly. Yeah, it's been weird, but we've all learned from it too. So that's good too. Yeah. Yeah.
One of the things that's been great is, you know, as you and I were talking about beforehand, Houston and Texas are really lucky that we have such a wealth of bookstores and book events. But it's been really great to see other booksellers step up and help each other out. Like when we were starting to get our event stuff set up, Kathy from Blue Willow was like, oh, hey, I found this best practice from this university that talks about like security things for Zoom events and things like that, about sharing passwords and things like that. Or like when we did an event with Lori King, she was like, oh, what platform are you using? So there was a lot of sense of community and people helping each other kind of figure out how to do all of this. The first virtual event that we actually did when we streamed through Zoom, the publicist from HarperCollins, I actually gave her my own Facebook login so she could go in and set up like all of the permissions so we would be able to.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that definitely, I mean, I think there has been a sort of community with book lovers through this pandemic because, hey, most of us are introverts and all we want to do is read.
Yeah. So speaking of the pandemic, so what has it been like for you? As we were talking before we got started, you know, we were talking about how I'd worked at Borders before and you'd spent a lot of time writing in cafes and things like that. How has the pandemic and being at home influenced or impacted your writing process at all?
Well, actually, before the pandemic, even before the pandemic, I stopped writing in cafes. I used to write, as I mentioned to you previously, in the Borders Cafe all the time before poor Borders closed. But I had so much problems with my wrists and shoulders from writing on a laptop for many books that I got very strict with myself and got a very ergonomically appropriate setup in my office at home. Plus my kids got older and went off to college, so they weren't around all the time. But I write at a treadmill desk, and I have a really unique ergonomic keyboard that's not the kind you find in a store. You have to order it online. It's very specific. And I have everything set up for my height and shoulder height and everything so that I'm much more careful. So I don't have the wrist and shoulder issues that I used to have. So the pandemic didn't hurt me in that way because I'd already made that change.
Yeah. So I had a question from Megan in the comments. Megan wanted to know what the High Society series we were talking about. Megan, I'm dropping a link to the first one. It's called Murder at Archley Manor by Sarah Rosette. They're if Colleen's books sound good to you, you'll love these as well. They're set in they're set in the 20s. The main character is sort of a poor relation to an aristocratic family, and she kind of is helping them do odd jobs and kind of work as a fixer. So they're also great as well. As I mentioned, Sarah is a local Houston author now.
Hi for me and that I'm a big fan.
What's that?
Please tell her hi for me and that I'm a big fan.
Will do. So we talked about how you have also been kind of a lifelong mystery fan. So when you're writing mysteries, are you able to read them as well, or do you try to read something else?
I do read mysteries while I write them. That's one thing I've been able to do. I think mainly because mysteries generally fall into certain categories relative to the type of puzzle it is. Like, for example, either you have the culprit, you know it's the culprit, but you don't know how to prove, you know, that they did it, but you already know who they were, or they have like an alibi that they have to prove is fake. So that's a certain type of one. Or you have the, you know, the English country estate where you have this closed building with all these people and you know one of them is the murder victim or the culprit, or, you know, it's a serial killer, which isn't really cozy mystery because you don't have a list of suspects if it's a serial killer. But so I can read mysteries for some reason, because a lot of time there are certain things like I couldn't read young adult when I was writing my Stoker and Holmes series. I just didn't like to do that. But for mysteries, I think the pleasure of mysteries is that as a reader and as a writer, I can appreciate both the story, but also the structure and how the clues are put in. And since I'm such a big reader of mysteries, I kind of pride myself on being able to figure out who done it early on. Yeah. And if I don't figure out who done it early on, I'm really impressed. So I love that. It's like a little mini challenge for me because I can usually see a clue a mile away. Watching TV, I'm immediately like in the first scene, I'm telling my husband, oh yeah, that's who did it. You know.
I can never, like you would think, having worked at Murder by the Book for 11 years at this point, that I would be better at guessing who it's going to be, but I always get it wrong. And like, I don't quite try to read to figure it out, but anytime I'm like, I know this is going to be this person, it's never that person. And I'm like, oh, I feel like I should be better at that.
No, we like that. I mean, I like that. I'm sure most writers most murder writers like that, because you don't want to figure it out too soon, or like you kind of have an idea of who it is, and then you kind of, if you're not sure, I just like to follow along how the author did it, and I like to see how they put the red herrings in. I like to look at it structurally and technically, I guess is the word. So yeah. So yes, I love mysteries. I'm a big fan. I read J.D. Robb. I read Margaret Mitsushima, her Canine Timber Creek series, the ones I mentioned already, Victoria Thompson, Sarah Rosette. Yeah, so can't get enough of them.
So Donna wants to know, she says, Brian Freeman most always has the killer just show up obscurely at the end. What do you think of that?
Well, I haven't read a Diane or Brian, did you say?
Brian Freeman.
Brian, okay, because there's Diane Freeman too, and I didn't think she'd done that, because I'd read her books too. I think that in a way, maybe that could be considered slightly cheating if you can't let the reader follow along and try and figure out who done it. If the clues aren't there. And of course, there are people who, for example, Agatha Christie's The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, if you haven't read it, I don't want to give any spoilers away, but that was a very unique solution. And she got a lot of flack from critics for saying, well, you cheated because you didn't, let us know. I don't want to give anything away, but I think there's a sense of, if you feel like if you're a little bit cheated, people might find that disgruntling. But at the same time, if it's a good story and you're along for the ride and you're enjoying yourself, then I guess that's okay. Now, speaking of cheating, I just finished watching Only Murders in the Building, which I loved. But I felt like they cheated a little bit, and I don't want to give spoilers, but I felt like they cheated. There was one scene that was a cheat, and I thought it was not appropriate. And so you couldn't, because I had thought this person might have been the murderer, and then they did this one particular scene, and I was like, oh, it can't be because of this. And then anyway, I don't want to say anything else, but I don't think I feel cheated. I
am behind. So when I get caught up, I'll email you and see if I feel cheated.
I've been waiting to rant about it with somebody because I feel like we cheated.
Yeah.
Even though I loved it and I'll watch the second season. So
I think one of the things that's really tricky, well, I will say this, one of the things I love about Murders in the Building is we've had so many people come in and they're like, hey, I want a mystery like this. So it's definitely gotten people to come in and be like, I want something like this, which has been great.
And then you can murder at Mallowan Hall when they do that, right?
Yes. Yes. I think one of the things that's tricky, a lot of the genre with the rise, and I'm not throwing things that's tricky, is, domestic and psychological suspense has become such a big part of the genre in the last couple of years. And so many of those books kind of are reliant on the twists, and which is good. But unless, sometimes you get those books where you're like, I don't know where this twist came from. And like you throw the book across the room because you're like, where did this come from? So I'm sure it's got to be like a fine line of making sure that people can figure it out and feel like they have a chance to figure it out and not just come completely out of left field.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like as long as when you get to the end and everything's explained and they can go back and go, oh yeah, I remember that, I remember that, I remember that, then that, to me, that works. Yeah. That's just my opinion. I mean, nothing against anybody who brings in the murder at the end. That's the way they tell their stories. But just for me personally, yeah.
So a couple of writing process questions. So when you're writing, since you are doing mysteries, are you more of a plotter or a pantser?
No idea what's going to happen till it happens. It's horrible. I don't recommend it. It's the way I write, though. Normally, I don't know who done it. I don't usually know for sure who done it until I'm almost done with the book. I might have an idea and then I might change it. It does happen. Like I said, I don't recommend this process, but it's the way it works for me. I probably always in the back of my head have the actual murderer as one of the options, but I don't actually settle on that person until I actually have to, until it's like, okay, we got to wrap this stuff up now. We've got the main thing. And then what's interesting, though, when I finally settle on the murderer and, I'm confident this is who it's going to be, hopefully it will be a surprise to most people, I find that I've already peppered some of the clues in there without even realizing it. So I do sometimes have to go back and tweak, but at the same time, I'm like, oh, I put this in here. I must have subconsciously known. Yeah. So, yeah.
Awesome. Let's talk about the title of the book, Murder at Mallowan Hall. Was that always the title, or were there other options that you guys went through?
I think the first thing we came up with was actually I wanted the title. What was it? The Body in the Murder Writer's Library or something like that, because I thought that would be pretty hooky. You'd know right away. Publisher didn't really like it, and I admit freely that I am horrible at titles, so I never try to title my books. Then it was Murder at Mallowan Manor, but there is actually another book called Murder at Mallowan Manor. So we were like, can't do that. So then we just switched it to Murder at Mallowan Hall. So it was pretty early on, a decision that was made, pretty straightforward. Mallowan, some people, do know the name Mallowan. Couldn't say Murder at Christie Hall because it was a little too much.
And let's talk a little bit about the cover. Did you have any input on the cover?
No, but isn't it beautiful?
It's gorgeous.
Oh my God. I can't even think I've ever been so happy about a cover in my life. I cannot wait to see what they do with the second one. Yes. When that cover showed up in my email from my editor, I was just over the moon. And the email didn't even do it justice until I actually got the arcs and then the books with that brilliant blue. I'm so happy with the cover. Loved it.
Yeah. Let me grab my copy so I can. So for those watching, there is minus the glare of the cover. I thought it was really smart of them to do like the typewriter and there's sort of the shadow of the house.
This is the actual, you have the arc. So let me see. So this is, and you can't really see the color, but I mean, it's.
Oh yeah. The blue is so pretty.
It's gorgeous.
But I thought it was smart of them to do like the typewriter, and then you sort of see the shape of the house, but not like just a big house on the cover of it too.
Yep. And then here's the murder weapon is the fountain pen, and there's the ink, and then of course Phillida's keys. So I love it. I'm just dying to see what they come up with for the second one. I'm sure it's going to be just as gorgeous.
So you mentioned you're working on the second one, or just finished the second one?
I just turned it in like a couple weeks ago, waiting to hear back from my editor on it, but I'm happy with how it turned out, and hopefully she'll be excited. The premise is that the Detection Club, which I mentioned previously, was an actual real group of detective writers that included Agatha Christie, G.K. Chesterton, Dorothy L. Sayers, and a bunch of other mystery writers from that time. And so what I have is a couple of them coming to the small town to do what they're calling a murder fete, F-E-T-E, as in a murder festival, for some amateur mystery writers and the town. And of course, somebody ends up dead. So you've got a bunch of murder mystery writers who are suspects and involved in this murder mystery. So it was I thought it was a lot of fun to write. I had a lot of fun writing it. And all of the amateur mystery writers are the suspects. So had fun with that. Yeah.
Fun.
And of course, it's a little teeny spoiler. It's a tiny, tiny spoiler. But when somebody dies from poison, they're all standing around discussing what poison it was, because they're all, they've all researched poison. So they're all like, well, no, it has to be this. No, it has to be that. So anyway, I had fun with it. I hope people enjoy it.
Awesome. And so about same time next year?
Yes. I don't actually know the pub date, but it's around this time next year. Yeah.
Next year. So we've talked about reading taste. We've talked about writing process. I completely just went blank on the next question that I was going to ask you. So are you just concentrating on this series now, or are you still doing any of your other series that you've written?
So I have a second series that's going to be coming from Kensington also that I can't say much about, but it is along the same lines as this as the Philida Bright series, in the sense that there's a very famous, well-known female that everybody knows, who is going to be the side character, the supporting character, and her friend is going to get involved in solving mysteries. And it is, I wish I could say more, but it's a little premature. So I'll be doing that series as well. It's called the Tabitha Night series. I did that by accident. Philida Bright, Tabitha Night, had no idea. So it's the Tabitha Night series. The first book will be out in, I think, May of 23.
Oh, wow.
I think it's May of 23. So anyway, I'll be doing 2 series for Kensington. And then I'm also doing an indie published series called the Wicks Hollow series, which is contemporary. It's murder, ghosts, and romance set in a little fictional tourist town in Michigan, which is where I live. So that series, I've got 6 books in that, and I'll do 1 per year in that. So I'll be doing about 3 books a year.
Wow.
2 for Kensington and 1 for that, which is that's about what I can handle. I don't really want to do many more than that.
So when you're working on multiple books a year, do you work on one at a time, or do you bounce back and forth between them?
One at a time. Yeah, I have in the past written 2 at one time, and I probably wouldn't do that again. And the way the deadlines are structured, it works out that I would do one, then the next, then the next. And then I usually have a little bit of time in between for a breather to do promo and stuff. But I've written 36 full-length novels, and so at this point I know my process, even though I don't necessarily like it, but I know my process and I trust the process so that I know what I'm capable of, basically. So
perfect. Awesome. So I think that is going to about do it for us for this evening. So before we head out, I want to recap for anybody who might have joined us after we got started. We have been chatting with Colleen Cambridge, whose book Murder at Mallowan Hall just came out on Tuesday. I got a question from Donna that just popped up. So before pandemic, did you do any writing conferences?
Yeah, I do. I've done Malice Domestic, and I used to do Romance Writers of America, and I've done why am I blanking? I've done BoucherCon. Yeah. So I do, and I have, and I will, and I actually love to give workshops. I do some local stuff too. So I don't mind getting up in front of people and talking. I can teach a lot of different things, or I can just sign books and chat about the book. So yes, I have, and I will as soon as it makes sense. Yeah.
Awesome. So as we mentioned, we've been chatting with Colleen Cambridge. Her book, Murder at Mallowan Hall, just came out on Tuesday. It's the start of the Philida Bright series. Definitely pick it up. It's fantastic. I loved it. Like she said, it's if you like good light historical, if you're interested in Agatha Christie, and if you missed any part of our chat, once we are done, Facebook and YouTube will archive it so you'll be able to rewatch it from the beginning. While you are playing around there, make sure you check out the previous events that we did. As I mentioned, we chatted with Lori Rader Day last week or the week before about her also kind of Agatha Christie related book, Death at Greenway. We chatted with Reese Bowen about her historical not that long ago. I'm super excited. On November 11th, Deanna Rayburn is going to be interviewing Nicole Glover about her books. So lots of great stuff coming up. So I hope that you guys will check all of that out. Colleen, it was so great to get to meet you virtually and chat. And, hopefully once the world rights itself, we can get you to Houston and get you to the store.
Love that. Thanks so much for a great event. Really, really great event. Love the questions. You kept me on my toes, but you didn't stun me with anything. And I like that.
That's exactly where we like to land. So thank you.
Thanks again.
Have a good night.